It's my heart that brings the temperature down.
What if I go like this? Does that work?
All right. Afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I guess a few quick introductions for those of us that are on camera especially, but so they can hear your voices, if those that are monitoring at home. So if we could introduce ourselves, I think that might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, Perezzo.
Juliana Stoll, school psychologist, clinical student services.
Tracy McConnell, third grade teacher, vice president for PCTA.
Lee Bryant, PCTA president.
Lindsay Blanken Baker, Executive Director of PCTA. Tamara Gramley, the Library Media Set.
Janet Cunningham, Calvin Hunsinger School, PSE.
Lauren George, staff attorney.
Paula Texel, Chief HR Officer.
Kevin Smith, Chief Financial Officer.
Luann Jordan, budget.
Rita Collins, HR.
Real briefly, Tracy was sharing with me that your father is undergoing a lung transplant right now. So those of you at home that participate in prayer, keep him in your thoughts. His name is Dave Anderson. He's currently on the table. So keep him in your thoughts, please.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right.
Tracy's fault.
Tracy's father. So if she steps out, it's because there's good news.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Only
Yes.
good news.
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. When we met last week, your side presented your counteroffer and you seemed eager and anticipatory about us signing your proposal last week. When I finally said that we would not be signing, the disappointment was visible. Understood. Let me give you a few numbers. 118, 119, 150, 198, and 133. And what do these numbers have in common? What do they do with our bargaining? These numbers represent the ridges. It's called reading on US coins that contained silver or gold at one time. 188 on dimes, 199 on quarters, 150 on half dollars, 198 on the dollar, and only 133 on Susan B. Anthony dollar. She got gypped. Back when coins were made of precious metals like gold or silver, one thing that clever people would do was clip the money, which would mean shave a tiny portion off the edge of a coin. If you shaved off a tiny piece of 20 on 21 pound gold coins, you might wind up with another pound of gold coin, 21 pounds of what you thought were gold coins at a pound each. You wind up debasing the currency and have made yourself richer in the process. What does this have to do with ridges and with our bargaining? Well, one of the ways they started to fight this problem was by edging the coins. If the coin was lacking its ridges, you knew it had been clipped and you might be less willing to accept it. This clipping is also something that tends to happen in contract negotiations. As we asked for explanations on the math your side was using to determine the pay rates for the employees, we noticed some things that made us less willing to accept what was being shown. First, the clipping. The salary multiplier for highly effective is 1.25% by statute. Effective is 0.75, and the COLA is up to 5%. For years, we've calculated it at the 0.5, and all of a sudden, using your numbers,
Not 5%.
it was 0.49. You never disclosed that you were changing the multiplier. You left it for us to discover. While it may not affect many teachers, it shows a lack of transparency in the bargaining. And it makes us work harder to see what else wasn't shared. We have been working hard. A few things that were shared as part of your last proposal that I personally and our team has issues with. Part one from your proposal, B, the school board's payment of 80% of the increase of health premium for the instructional unit. That's already part of our contract that runs through 2025. It's nothing new for this year. Article 47 already states, quote, the board will pay approximately 80% of the annual health insurance premium for the duration of this agreement. Individual amounts will vary based on the plan selected, close quote. So why is this being stated as part of the bargaining agreement. And item C from your proposal, the $594 increase to salaries funded by the revenue received from Pinellas County School referendum is equal to a salary increase ranging from 0.8 to 1.2%. That's your language. That is part of the referendum money paid by the property tax referendum on the homeowners of Pinellas County, and it has nothing to do with your salary proposal. That's already there. You keep speaking. Last week, you kept speaking about the 4.25% average increase in pay, using the phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. But whose boats are getting the 4.25% lift? What you've done is increase the pot of possible money for salaries, 4.25%, and worked it backwards to make things fit. If you'd offered a true average 4.25% increase, it might have been worth considering. But you didn't, and we didn't. If you had promised out a true 4.25%, we would have been willing to accept it. So now we're going to present our counter proposal. And I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Blankenbaker, Lindsay, to explain our thoughts on this.
Thanks, Lee. It's, I'd like to, at the risk of beating a dead horse, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we, the process that we walked through last week that was, was with y'all and on our own. And how we got to our proposal today.
Yep.
So
Thank you.
as y'all, those of you who watched the last live stream probably remember that we had some difficulty towards the end at lining up the numbers. We understood the percentages, but there was a discussion back and forth over whether or not to or whether our numbers matched up. And we both agreed that we needed to take a look at each other's method of calculation in order to understand why our total was coming across as being so different. And what we found was that, just like we mentioned, that we were starting from two different places. Our methodology had been to calculate, to the extent possible, given the fact that there are statutory parameters that we have to work within, to start with what the increase would be on average to an actual individual, to look at the bargaining unit data, which of course y'all have shared with us. We've updated it. We've gotten as close as possible. I know that that's a little bit of a moving target, so we understand that the numbers might not always be exactly the same. But when we were looking at the total of the entire unit, calculating what each amount would be to affect an average increase, and then plugging that into different spots in the calculator to comply with statutory ratios, the whole process, even if imperfect, was to accurately reflect or accurately portray to our members how it actually lands with them in the way that I think the MOU, your MOU is written to reflect an average increase. What we found, though, in our discussion, once we had, I had shared my calculator, we had a phone discussion, and then y'all shared yours, was that the district's method of calculating the average was to decide, to pre-decide what to spend on the unit, then reverse engineer the increase to the legacy, to those on the legacy, what we're calling the legacy scale, or schedule rather, and that would push changes to our highly effective COLA on the annual scale in compliance with statute. The issue with that is that that does not yield, that method disregards the individual, which our members are individuals who are going to be voting potentially to ratify eventually our agreement, and they should have the correct information. It also doesn't get anyone close to being an actual 4.25% at your most recent offer average. In fact, your calculations or your method of calculation yields an average increase, an average individual increase of 3.55. So we disagree, and I know that there was a great deal of discussion at the table last week about, just like Lee mentioned, a rising tide raises all ships, right? I like to say that myself. I think it's a good philosophy to help us navigate this process that can be difficult. But there's a great deal of emphasis on a difference in philosophy, that when we had brought many creative ways of thinking about compensating our individual employees that are bearing an ever greater portion of work as they see their colleagues leaving the district, leaving the profession in droves. It turns out that the philosophical difference at the table last week was defined as being, we want to get more money to more people. When truly the philosophical difference was, we calculate this so that an individual can understand it and make a decision about what they're actually voting for their salary, not predetermining what is to be spent and then letting that trickle down in a way that misrepresents how it's going to land with an individual. For example, to affect an actual 4.25% increase, using a calculation of the percent that the legacy supplement actually impacts someone on the legacy scale on average, the way that the highly effective pay would, the impact that would have on someone and the average salary on the scale, to get to an actual 4.25% increase, that takes us to $2,335 for each individual on the legacy schedule. It takes us to $2,918.75 for an individual who is on the annual scale, but earned highly effective for 22-23. $2,189.06 to all teachers that earned effective in 22-23. Again, that's on the annual scale. And for COLA or all other teachers on the annual scale who were working here in 22-23, that's $1,094.53. We also, that is not only in compliance with statute, but it also follows because there are some ranges that are built into statute. That follows the range that we have agreed upon for the last 2 years. And that deviating from that range, we've never discussed. We found it, but we've never discussed it. So we went right back to what we've agreed to do for the last 2 years. This is being the third.
Can I ask you to repeat what you just said? I didn't follow what you're just saying.
The whole thing?
No,
No.
just something about we found it.
We found it. So there was a calculation in your calculation of your vote of your last offer, your last counter offer, that paid for those employees who would be earning COLA, who are below effective. And again, I'm careful about using the term COLA just because I think the statute isn't totally clear on how that exactly how that fits into law. But we've used that term at the table, and so I know that we all know what it means. The range for COLA can be up to 50% of effective. Every year since this law has been in place, we have calculated it to 50% of effective. And this year, your calculations took it to 49%. Small difference, But it was yet a difference that we had not discussed at the table. And just like Lee said, it drives us to dig even further into why our numbers are coming up differently. So our calculations that I just listed out affect a true 4.25% average for an individual in the bargaining
Yes, yeah.
unit.
It's always a no. Which one?
Less, it's because the thing says less than
It's- yeah.
50%. That
But-
when we're doing our calculations, we use 0.49.
We always have.
I don't know if that was something
We
discussed
previous-
or not, but that just when we're doing the projections.
Or does the statute say up to 50% or less than 50%?
No,
It's possible that we stayed under 50% to the extent that it would not have made a calculable difference in the individual award by 49.99999. It's possible that we did that to the point where we would have rounded up to dollars and cents. It's possible. But 49%, even though that's small, it's relatively small, it's still a difference. And every discussion that we've had at the table for the last 2 years has been to comply with the statute, but also to combat compression as much as possible. And the way that you do that is paying people that are prescribed what increase they can get by statute, the maximum of that range.
So can I just interrupt just to clarify what the statute does say?
Sure.
It says that the COLA will not exceed 50%. And I think what Dave was just saying is that you use the same methodology that you have used for the last several years.
Correct.
So we didn't deceive you as suggested by Lee in his opening remarks that we somehow were chipping off the coin, so to speak. We use the same methodology that we have always used in compliance with the statute. And
Right.
it's probably a rounding issue is my guess.
Well, and I can understand, like I said, it's a small amount, but I do know that we discussed those ratios multiple times at the table and acknowledged that we were going to go for both sides, would go for the highest range possible within the statute. And that was 50%. So I'm not saying, I didn't go back and dig into our calculations for previous years because we agreed to them and we ratified them and we moved on. But that statement was made at the table. I couldn't tell you whether it was 21, 22 or 22, 23, but it was an agreement that we had at the table to maximize or to minimize the impact of compression to the extent possible by maximizing the increase within the statutory range. 49 was not something that we discussed. 50 was. And again, that's a small
Less than
amount. It
50,
doesn't
must be
amount to a
less than
whole lot. But it led us to understand that we really needed to get on the same page about how that was calculated. And again, through that discussion, we came to the conclusion, and we said it in the phone call, was that the difference was the district was starting with a total increase, like how much you want to spend, and then working backwards. But that doesn't have the effect of an average increase as an individual would understand it. It simply doesn't. And I think actually the language of the MOU is it doesn't make that clear.
So
Instead,
it's less than $1,000.
yeah, very small,
Between-
very small.
There's 20.
Again, but that wasn't, we had a
How many
state,
people,
we
Dave?
stated that,
20 people?
20 people.
20 people.
yeah, very
Okay.
few, very few.
Just-
Actually, and that'll point to another difference that,
Can you bring up your spreadsheet?
yeah, I can plug it in.
So
So.
I found a couple of formula things that I think also affect the totals.
Sure, yeah, so I'll have to say it because it's right.
I'm just trying to figure out.
Thanks. So I'm sorry to pull it up behind y'all, but if you don't mind turning a little bit, you'll be able to see it.
We have it, so that's good.
Thanks. Now, it's not great because the scale, like what I did in order to understanding the way the district was calculating it and working and using our own calculations to get to an actual increase of 4.25, I had to extend it on
You can
either
just go
side,
up
but
a
I'll kind of
point
walk
if you
you
need
through it.
to. Might be easier to go up in point.
Okay.
Okay. Here's the district's most recent offer. 920. It is 4.25% increase of the total amount. What that does is actually increases the current total by 4.21. Now, there are different, we've had some discussions over whether, for example, our original calculations include, we were using this data on the legacy roster and the annual roster as of September 15th. We learned in that conversation that it included the referendum. So we went through and I went through and recalculated it, taking the referendum out, right? Because that's the way that this increase would be calculated. So it could be a small amount that might account for that percentage, like the difference between what other total compensation that the district is counting in the calculations. Remember that we did reach a point in which this number, how many were at the annual base, that was a question mark. And what we advised after we had several discussions about that was just to use the numbers as we had them. There may be a slight difference between who's on the legacy roster and the annual roster on September 15th and what numbers were included here. That's why I highlighted that in red, because that was my question mark.
Yeah, that number is quite different.
Yep.
The people that are less than 52,000, there's 1,281.
There's a handful of them, and you can, I know that that would make some difference in that you are, I shouldn't say handful, it's a number. Some of them are on leave. We have a number of employees that are on leave. We also have a number of part-time employees.
Number of employees between 51,162 and 52,000 is 1,281.
Okay, and that is
And
the
that's why
information.
our cost is like a little over $1 million to get up to 52,000 for that 1,281.
Gotcha, and I think you'll see a difference too. Remember that we had that discussion back and forth via email at the end of last week. In fact, we spoke about it again earlier today as well, that was an outstanding number that we didn't have. And what we were advised, what you advised us to do was just use the information that I asked.
Right.
And it was use the information that you have. So the way that I arrived at that was actually counting them, right? Not, so there are some people on leave, there are some people part-time, but just counting the number that we're at 51,162. Again, that's with referendum. That was the base salary for last year. But you'll see that it now, and again, I use the percentages to yield these numbers. You mentioned that there are 20 people on COLA. If you use the percentages that were in your calculator, it actually yields 3. So there's differences. We might come down to the way that it's being counted. Also, again, moving target between legacy and or between 9/15 and now. I mean, I know it doesn't seem like that should be that much, but it's possible that you have a little bit of change. But just generally, again, here's the statutory ratios. I note here that the annual base salary used to, up until, well, there was 1 year that it did, had to amount to, I'm sorry, when people are walking around upstairs, it shakes the screen. 75% had to be a minimum of 75% of any increase to the legacy schedule. But the district brought a counter proposal that changed it to that set that now that the statute no longer requires it, puts it at 838 to bring it to an even 52,000 a year. That's a legitimate proposal. I noted in red that did not meet the form. It wasn't in deference to a previous statute. So that was something a little bit different. I've tried to label it as clearly as possible. Here are highest, lowest, and average salaries to the legacy and the annual scale. 50,568 is the current base salary minus referendum. Unit current average, and then the potential average is slightly lower, but we have some people on leave. So these are the averages that we're using.
Those averages are with the referendum.
Sorry,
Those averages are with the referendum.
they are not. I went back and recalculated the averages, took each of these rosters, took the referendum off, and used them to calculate those. Now, again, it's possible that your
They're higher
data,
than-
because you mentioned that your data was updated as of the end of August, and I have this data as of September 15th. I'm sure that it's been updated by now too, but
Did we
keep in
see
mind
that?
that we don't have, I mean, y'all send it to me.
No, that calculation where you're
Yeah.
getting that. Where you subtracted the referendum.
No, I think you just wanted the cell highlighted so you could see the calculation, right?
No, I did it on the actual roster
Oh.
and then calculated it that way.
Oh.
So again, and I think, and this is one of
No.
the challenges.
I think you need to see it. That's,
Just real quick,
What?
could I see where you subtracted the referendum?
Mhm.
And like, do you
Here.
come up with what is your total
This,
salary without
So-
referendum?
so these 4 columns, if you look at the green, and there's something similar that happens on the annual, it's something really similar. Is I take these are the numbers or the columns that came, well, this column came across from the district. It's labeled probably on, I think maybe it's labeled on this one, so you can see a little more clearly. Yep. And I really want to be careful about, because we're not live streaming the.
We are not
are we?
that, no.
Okay,
That's what I was just.
that's the challenge, that's really the challenge, David, so I'm actually gonna
Yeah.
stay away from showing those individuals. But the point is that what I did was, when we talked on Friday, just like you advised, not you, but in our conversation, I backed out the referendum, recalculated the average salaries according to the rosters that we had. And again, you'll see these little red, occasionally you'll see these little red arrows where there's notes there. That indicates that that is the average salary, that the potential average, those are the people that are on leave, counting for people on leave. They're different numbers, but we're just using the people that are actually in the seats, right? So, or in those spots. That's how we yield the current average of 58, 216, 24. That's the current average for us, an employee here in Pinellas County Schools, according to the data that you sent us.
Without that.
It's challenging because I don't have control over this data. I'm just working with what y'all send. And so there's, there's bound to be some differences, but the method of calculation is fundamentally different. What the district did here was arrive at a total that you projected to spend right here. With Fran, it was 788. That's with a 20%, 21% calculation for French. And then reverse engineered the legacy payment, which actually ends up being an average of 3.34. So on the legacy scale, so you can see,
What's
sorry,
the formula for that? 1945.
that was just the number that y'all,
Can you click on that field? Like, how are you calculating?
no, it's what was
You
in your
typed it in?
proposal. I just typed it in. Because it doesn't meet the calculation that was designed to actually yield an individual average.
But your
calculation-
of 3 is taking that dollar amount divided by which figure?
I'll show you where it is. If you go a little bit further over, sorry, and again, I'm sorry I can't show everything at one time because it's really wide. But you can see how I've added these here. The average legacy percent increase is actually 3.13. Everybody on the legacy scale would get the same percentage.
How are you calculating that figure? Can you
I'm
show us the
doing-
formula?
I can show you, sure.
You're taking,
So I'm taking the payment, the legacy payment, which would be here,
19,
here, and then divided it by the number of teachers on the legacy scale, because they all get the same thing. Under statute.
I don't think, it looked like it was divided by the 11. You're dividing it by the.
The average legacy, the average salary on a legacy scale.
Yeah, but
I can do
that would mean you're.
Will it come up then?
That's
Plug in
not
my one
gonna
number and I'll get a
come
couple
up
of
with-
things. Plug
You're
in
doing that
that
by
number.
the average salary without referendum.
Yeah,
That's what you're-
when I took the referendum off after our conversation on Friday, then I went back and
Sure.
recalculated all of those
I'll
numbers.
do it for you.
So,
Oh, here.
accounting for referendum, which made sense, it made sense. Here, you can see that is referring to the 19, whatever that 1945, I forget what it was. That's what that yields as an average percent increase on the legacy schedule. I say schedule because it's prescribed by years of experience. This is where it starts to get a little bit different. The average, and this is where our method of calculating it, that is driven by what it means to an individual, as we've represented it to our bargaining unit members for the last 2 years, is that the average annual dollar increase, and you can see this formula, David, I don't know if this helps. I'm going to put you on the spot and just want to show
that's
you the
fine.
formula.
Yeah, that's fine.
That is all of their increases, you can see up there, all of the increases that were in your proposal, right? Times the number of people in the unit. So you may remember that up here, it listed how many employees we were projected to have under highly affected, how many employees we were projected to have under affected, and so forth. So you divide that by the total number of employees, that's gonna yield you your average dollar increase
14.5
right here.
to 7.
That yields an average annual percentage increase of 3.96.
So it's just under 3 million.
Now that's on the annual scale. Then when you take these guys, the average legacy, I keep holding the screen, it's not gonna change the, not a scientist. The average, nor am I a mathematician, really, I'm just plugging and playing. The 3% increase here and the 3.313 and the 3.96 actually yields an individual percent increase. This is between both scales of the schedule and the scale of 3.55. So even though the increase to the total amount was close to 4.25%, that's not what that means to an individual. And the way that it's been represented suggests that. So what we did was say, okay, let's run these numbers in the way that we calculate it, which was, what kind of an increase do we need to yield for our members? Like you said, Lori, we want to get the most money for the best increase for the most amount of people. So if we need to affect, if what we're trying to affect is a 4.25% increase, notice that I've taken off our previous proposals, because the difference between the way we were calculating them was in some cases close to $10 million because of the way that we were calculating it. So here, if you start with 4.25%, what was sort of suggested by your proposal, that actually increases the current expenditure by a little over 5%. It yields a legacy payment, and just like you said it's written in the proposal, $2,335. That then drives highly effective at 2,918.75. That drives effective at 2,189.06, and that drives COLA at 50% at $1,094.53. Agreeing with the base payment to bring all of our base up to 838. Of course, that's gonna come out to be larger, Dave, if this number, which again, I don't have access to, but if this number is higher, it will mess around with these totals a little bit. But your total ends up being approximately 17,600,000 with fringe at 21%. Notice that I'm not doing that. This is all formula driven. That yields an average legacy increase of 3.75, 3.76, an average annual amount increase or dollar increase of 2,578, an average annual percentage increase of 4.75, and a total average increase between both schedules of what the schedule and the scale of 4.25. So what we have agreed to do in this proposal is essentially honor your proposal, calculating it to the individual, which is the way that we have together communicated this to members for going on 3 years.
All right, so I follow what you're saying. And if I take your figures, the 2,335 and our schedule does the same thing. It takes that amount times 125%. Probably effective.
Yeah, your calculator does that too.
If I take your figures, I do come up with total cost without fringe is about 17.6 billion. And then adding fringe. So using our
It's math.
spreadsheet, we come out because our counts are close. We're off 20 people or so on legacy and a few people on the other one just because of the time and space. So the formulas are doing the same exact thing.
It's just the dollar.
Now I'm following what you're saying. Our philosophy of how we figure out the pot of money might be a little bit different, but we started with, which I think you had the same figures. If you go back to your total, which you don't want to show on there, but I don't want to show either, without referendum.
Oh, yeah,
our
I
total
just can't put this
salary-
because there's names attached.
Yeah, our total salaries without referendum are $349 billion. If we take an average of 4.25% of that, that's where we got our $14.8 billion and adding fringe to that. So that's our base cost of what we're saying. That's how much it's going to cost our budget, our district budget, and then adding fringe on top of that. We're saying the same thing.
So
I think.
your dollar amount, Lindsay, actually
And you can
amounts to
use our
a,
spreadsheet,
That's what
we
she
come out
said.
to the same thing, like I
5%.
put on
Yeah.
your totals for legacy and highly effective. I'm coming up with the same totals that you have
Yep.
there. So I don't think we're, doing
We're-
anything different using our spreadsheet versus
It's just the
yours.
number. It's the
It's
final
just
number.
how much of the cost that Mr. Smith is gonna incur.
Right,
Or
and this,
his budget.
yes, like our calculations are gonna amount to the same, but what I'm saying is different. And what we've tried to rectify
Yeah.
with our counter proposal is the way, if you look at your spreadsheet, right, but the
yeah.
MOU itself reads an individual, I don't have it in front of me up here, but it reads an an average increase. That's now,
Well,
that, but that's not,
We've always said it's an
So-
average of increase.
so that amount-
but what I'm saying is
If
the
you
way that
take
you were
24
calculating it, it wasn't.
If you take $2,400 of highly effective divided by somebody that's at, 53,000, it's gonna be more than 4.25%. If you take the 2,400 highly effective of somebody on the top of the performance, it's gonna be less, but the total average of the 349 million is 4.25%. That's how much
Where
you're gonna
your numbers
Very nice.
don't get there is here. In the treatment of the value of the payment to the legacy schedule. And the difference of what must be paid to COLA, effective and highly effective. If we treat it all as the same, if the payment was the same, then your average would hold up, but it's not, so it doesn't. You have to multiply the actual person, like how it's gonna hit with an individual person.
That's
what
our
they're going to
middle part
make-
Thing is doing, it's taking the 2,079 people times the 1945 to come up with that cost. And then the cost of the same thing with highly effective and effective to come up with that total.
And it will reach, and I agree with you, it'll reach this total,
Right,
but it will not affect the percentage increase that is suggested by the MOU. The MOU suggests an average of a 4.25% increase, and it doesn't. The average is actually a 3.55% increase. When you consider how this impacts the individual, even if you don't go as far as considering how it impacts an individual, if you simply consider the way that it impacts the annual contract teachers, which is that's why we want to call it the annual scale, because it's anyone who is on that schedule, and the legacy schedule. Without considering that, all you're doing is increasing the total amount by a prescribed total that you decide. I don't mean to say you, please understand, I know this.
Stop talking.
But it's gonna get you to the total, but it does not get you to the average that the MOU suggests. And so what we did with our proposal was just say, let's get it to the average. And you can see that this is a significant concession. This is a significant work to get much, much, much closer to the middle. Let's get to an actual average increase of 4.25%. But to do that, this is what it looks like, not what the district proposed last week. So that's the nature of our proposal.
So your proposal actually amounts to a 5.04% increase
Yeah,
based upon that unit. And we have this year and always looked at a percentage of the unit as a total cost.
Mhm.
This is no different than what we've done in the past.
No,
The
that's.
cost
we
of this
just
unit,
realized that.
May I?
Mr. Smith,
May I?
please.
The cost of this unit is $349 million, they have suggested. 4.25% of $349 million, is $14 million and change. What you're suggesting is $17.6 million, which is a 5.04% increase, which is $3 million more than we're offering,
Correct.
and $3 million more than we have.
I disagree with that, but I do, and I think that as we work through the rest of the proposal, I think that you'll find that there are some places built in where you've got some flexibility. Is this okay that I turn this off and return to the table? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Oh, I'm sorry, I wish I was supposed to let the can borrow yours for a second.
Oh.
Thanks. All right. So you'll see as well that our counter proposal, we list all of that. Then we additionally recognize that in the district's previous or most recent counter, that you suggested an increase to the athletic, academic, and fine arts supplements, an increase by 3.5%. We noted in the last meeting that was different from your overall proposed increase of 4.25%. We actually have proposed going to 4.25% for supplements as well, and I think you'll see why in a moment. We also extended the definition of the supplements that are subject to negotiations to include professional supplements, because that's something that we've talked about at the table. We've worked on in supplement committee, and you'll see A little bit further down, I've just copied the language about the minimum supplement amount will be raised to 300. That was just like your proposal. 2 flex options per school, a middle school cross-country coach supplement and an elementary music teacher supplement will be added. That's all from your proposal. However, previously we had items on our proposal that asked for the extension of the technology coordinator supplement to all LMTS, and that there would be a creation of a supplement for our licensed mental health counselors, but recognizing that those are really the purview of the supplement committee, and also using your when we ask some of these questions to be researched or evaluated, we asked that or you came back and said that most library media technology specialists already received the tech coordinator supplement. There was like maybe I think 25 or so that didn't. So what we did was roll those into the supplement proposal and ask that that's what the committee does, that they effect that all LMTs will receive that supplement, and that we will create through that work or through that committee a licensed mental health counselor supplement. We are also.
So can I clarify, because it's going to go to you're right. That is all from supplement committee. That was a recommendation from the supplement committee. So what you're asking is when the supplement committee meets again to look at, I see you've got research, evaluate, implement, that the tech coordinator position only be assigned to the LMT at the school. Is that what you're asking to the committee to
No,
look at?
that it's not to say that it couldn't be extended to someone else.
There's one supplement for a tech coordinator.
Then
at
it would
her
go,
school.
then it would go to the LMT, yes.
So
If
you're
there was-
asking that that would,
Well, keeping in mind that there's 2 flex options now, it's
I
possible.
fully, yeah, so I'm just want to make sure what
Yep.
I'm understanding what
We
you're
want to
asking the
make sure that our
committee.
LMTs are all receiving that supplement. If there's only a handful of them that aren't, we want to make sure that that's actually part of the contractual agreement.
And
So-
I'll repeat what I repeated last time, that
Okay.
those supplements are school-based decisions that are made. So again, I respect school-based decision-making as opposed to a district initiated one. So I just wanted that to be out there. I don't know the situations at each school, why some are provided to other people in other duties,
Yeah.
but I will certainly, absolutely, I mean,
I think that
we will
the-
take that.
I
I
think that the
wanted to say
common-
that there was nothing else really to.
Yeah, I think that the common thread there, that really that makes this a district level decision is that the incorporation of the technology and the expansion of the job description of our LMTs to include technology was unilateral. Our job descriptions aren't subject to
I'm not
negotiation.
arguing before
that's
or
what I'm-
against it, but we continuously hear, let schools make decisions, let school make decisions. So I just want to make sure that we always have to kind of
Yeah,
look at all options or all impacts of a decision being made. So,
and I
okay.
can totally understand that. But like I said, if it's a change and it's a policy that's implemented at the district level, it does, I think, it does
Yep.
have, we have the ability. and
Again,
we should
supplements
standardize it.
are at the discretion of the schools. Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I get a clarification? I'm sorry, the flex options, is there a cap on those flex options? Is there an amount? on
Yep,
those flex-
300. The committee
300.
decided to do that at 2 options at 300. So we raised the 300 to
Two
that.
options.
Oh, I see. Thank you for that clarification.
All right, item 4, board agrees to charge no increases to health insurance premiums for employees in the instructional bargaining unit. There are still ESSER funds out there that have not been requested. For the last 2 years, we've had no increase in the insurance premiums for the employees.
3 years, right?
So we would like to continue that for one more year. Yes.
Yeah.
One more year to go through the ESSER funds that are available. No health insurance premiums for the employees. And reference to Article 28. This
Number-
is yours.
Number 5 is
This is beautiful.
a little bit, thanks. Number 5 is a little bit, it was challenging to shift. What we talked about was the impact of the removal of any kind of financial accountability that districts had to comply with the class size amendment. That was removed by statute this year. So even though the class size, the voter ratified class size amendment that has been in place for years is still in place because it's a part of the Constitution. Legislature has effectively eliminated it by removing any kind of accountability to comply with it. And so what we were trying to do here was to edify the fact that we have for years treated vacancies as absences for the purpose of Article 28. So Article 28 is about compensation for teachers who give their time either during their planning period or accept students into to absorb students into their classes in the case of an absence. We have treated vacancies as absences for years. This does edify that, it doesn't change it. However, what previously we were asking for was a valuation. Again, this is information that I don't have access to, but it was a valuation of the cost that not the district, but the individual teachers have borne since vacancies have been collapsed this year in lieu of compliance with the class size
So
amendment.
can I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
We have always complied with class size, always. I think there was 1 year that we missed class size in the very early days by a few students in the district because it was a new concept. We intend to and will comply with class size again this year. We do every year. And if you look right now at our class sizes, at the elementary level, remember elementary requires an 18 to 22, K3 is 18, 4 through 8 is 22. Currently, we're at an average in K3 of 16.5. 16, I'm sorry, 0.15. In 4 through 8, we're at 18.48. Remember, that was 22. So we're roughly 2.5, 3.5 students below class size average. In middle school, it requires 22. We're at 19.47 on average. High
Okay,
school requires 25. We're at 21.97. There's no intent in this district to not comply with class size, despite the fact there's no penalty. We have never been penalized, so it doesn't really matter to us. The penalty has been lifted. We've never received a penalty in this district because we've never not complied with class size, except perhaps that 1 year in the early days.
Yeah.
So our intent as a district is to comply with class size.
well, that's good to hear. I will say that I think it's important to clarify, and first, you're giving me numbers that I've asked for that I was informed that weren't available. And it's not to say that they didn't exist, but because this
So
is.
I don't think you asked for
That's not
class
what you
size
asked
numbers.
for.
You asked for the numbers of teachers that were displaced as a result of students not being.
Sorry?
here. I don't believe you asked for the class size numbers earlier today or Friday or last week or whenever it was. You were asking for the numbers of teachers that were receiving additional students into their classes. And that's kind of a moving target because we don't set class size at the 10-day count. We do a 10-day count to try and adjust ourselves for class size, which occurs in October. So when we do the 10-day count, we look at our staffing and our schedules are not completely built out yet. All of our students are not quite in the schools yet. So we have students coming in. So we migrate, and I brought Ms. Jordan here because she actually oversees the class size compliance. We monitor our class size on a daily basis between the 10-day count and the October date certain. And our intent and our goal has always been, and we've always met that goal, is to meet class size. We meet class size every year. This year will be no different.
So, and if I may, I understand what you're saying, but the fact that you're citing district, and just to clarify, because there are people watching that might not be familiar with this, because we field a lot of questions on this. What you're citing are district averages, and that's important to note because there has for years been, and it still exists, the ability of a district, and I think it's especially attractive to our larger district, to utilize a district-wide average.
It's actually called the grade group average, not district.
Grade group, right, but it is calculated based at the district level, and so you have the opportunity.
No, it's at the school level.
At the school level.
Okay, but if the district, if you calculate it even if you were calculating it at the site average, it doesn't, or I'm sorry, at the site level. It does take into account units that a lot of people might not necessarily understand aren't standardized classrooms. So for example, like a self-contained ESE classroom that has a limited number of students in it would still count towards that average, making it nearly impossible, I would say, nearly impossible not to, and just like you said, if there's only been 1 year that you didn't comply, it becomes really difficult not to comply with that average calculation that's available to you under statute, because of the inclusion of units that are so far under that total as to skew the numbers so much that it doesn't really reflect what's happening in individual classrooms. But that calculation has been available in under statute for years. People don't necessarily, like our members don't feel it necessarily, but it's not to say that you've been violating it. However, once we remove that financial accountability, the opportunity is there to collapse these vacancies. We've heard, and this is information we asked for, but hasn't been available. We have heard that we've received individual level suggestions of units that were being lost. That's not to say that those are employees being lost, because most of them, if not all of them, have been moved into other units at different schools. We understand it's a balancing process. But even though that calculation is ongoing, what we asked for was for the definition of vacancies to be frozen, even if you didn't keep them. But for the purposes of compensating those teachers that are receiving students from split from these classes, that be frozen at the 10-day count. It's not to say that you don't have your own responsibilities to comply in your own compliance periods. What we were asking for was to say at the 10-day count, these were the vacancies that we had. And even if those units didn't exist or they were collapsed after the 10-day count, that we would still honor that in compensation for those teachers who have then taken on those students, whether it's into their class or onto their caseloads permanently for the entire year. And it's wonderful to hear that the district agrees to it, because then this shouldn't be a problem. If your intention is to comply with not what the state allows you to do, which again, I've characterized it and I'll do it again as a race to the bottom. If we are going to hold ourselves to a higher standard and you agree that that's the goal, then it shouldn't be a problem to meet that, to meet what we've asked here.
So class size remains the law with or without the penalty. And we have no intention of violating the law.
Okay, great. So this should be, we should be able to come to an agreement on that.
No, because this
Well-
mentions non-core classes, and non-core classes are not subject to class size.
That's true. And we did propose that, but that's certainly something that you could propose as a counter. If you wanted to limit the scope of it by removing non-core classes, that's a different conversation. What we have asked here is actually backing off of our original ask, because again, it proved difficult, if not impossible, for us to be able to evaluate it. And again, that makes it difficult for us to determine the total value of this compensation agreement that we're coming to, because we don't have a way to say how much that's worth. So saying, I'll give you this, but I won't give you that. If we don't know the value that's attached to it, it makes it very difficult for us to weigh that on our own side. So what we've asked is that we affirm this practice and we agree to impact bargaining to give it real effort, give it real calculation after this agreement has come to. And if the district doesn't have an intention of stepping outside the prescription of the class size amendment, even though you can under state law or the absence of state law at this point, then that's great. It shouldn't be an additional impact, but I do think that the impact bargaining is called for there. So this provides for an opportunity not to come to a total agreement here, but to handle it at a different table or the table separately.
Lindsay, if I can just go to number 5.
Yeah.
I think I've read this probably 20 times and we've all read it and interpreted it differently. You're going to have to give me specific examples of how you view this working so that I can
An
understand it.
example of
'Cause
a-
the language is convoluted, but if you give us some examples, I mean, all of us have read this together several times and interpreted
don't.
differently. So it's just subject to ambiguity. So if you can just give us examples of how you envision this working, that would be helpful.
So one of the things we have to consider is how to handle something from an administrative standpoint. And the question I have is, if let's say a teacher at the 10-day count has 11 students, and because of balancing of classes, 3 students are moved into her classroom, so she now has 15, but just still below the class size limit. Are you suggesting that she should be compensated for those additional 3 students?
No. What I'm suggesting is, now if that vacancy were to be active, if you still have the advertised vacancy, and then the students but we don't have somebody in that spot, and so those students are distributed or split to different classes. Think about from at the elementary level. If they're split to different classes, then those teachers are already on a daily basis eligible for sub pay.
Yeah.
The difference I'm talking about is the change in statute that relieves the district of any penalty for failure to comply with either the direct or the average calculation of the class size amendment. That no longer exists. And so there is effectively no statutory restriction on the district's non-compliance with class size.
There is, the statute still exists. The penalties
The
are, removed.
constitutional amendment still exists,
The penalty's
but-
been removed. I
but the
stipulate that.
penalty has been removed.
But we
And
have,
so there is no account, I'll say this, there is no statutory accountability on this or any other district in the state of Florida to comply with the voter ratified intent of the class size amendment. So what I was suggesting here, and believe me, I wrestled with this language too, it's a little bit difficult to design language that is all encompassing, but I think the difference in philosophy, if you will, is giving it a shot rather than saying, no, we're not addressing this at all. So the way I tried to address it was to say, if you had a situation in which a vacancy was still advertised, those kids are already being split into classes and those teachers that receive them are eligible for subpay. The difference would be if you had a vacancy at a school, now the district can simply dissolve that unit. It does not remain a vacancy. But yet the students that were in that unit, whether they're 11 or 24, depending on the level, whatever it was, those students are still present. They're still distributed into someone's classes, but because the vacancy doesn't exist, it doesn't trigger the language under Article, is it 28?
So you are
That
essentially,
affords subpay.
so you are essentially saying that if a teacher has 11 students in a class and there's a vacancy that's advertised and the vacancy is not filled, the vacancy is liquidated, those students are then distributed among the other classes. The 11 students are now in a class, in that 11 student class. They now have additional 3 students. You're suggesting that teacher get paid for those 3 additional students. We just said that.
If it were to put that unit, that existing unit over the class, the ratios of the class size amendment, and I listed that language here. If
So I think
that's-
Lori's suggestion, I don't mean to interrupt you, Lindsay, but I think Lori's suggestion is probably the best. If you can give us some examples.
Yeah.
Of
Okay.
what you're
So if
referring
you were
to.
to have, if
Because
you were
I-
to
I-
have,
If you could write some examples.
Yes.
for us, because there's too many variables here that we're hearing.
So give us some of those.
And you're
examples.
suggesting that we're not in compliance.
No,
with the-
absolutely.
With the class size,
Competitive
grade
terms.
group average. We are in compliance.
no, I've never actually, I'll be clear, I have never said that you're not in compliance. What I have said is that there is no financial accountability to
Which is
hold
suggesting
the-
we're going to go out of compliance.
Pardon me. I'm not suggesting that. And in fact, if what you're saying is that you fully intend to comply, then you can agree to this without any financial penalty, without any financial consequence at all, because you're already going to be in compliance. What we are doing is suggesting building in accountability that the state has removed.
So I understand what you're saying, but to Lori's point, I think this would be a difficult clause to interpret. On if it came to a disagreement for some reason, I think it's really difficult to read and understand what it's saying. So I think
Yeah.
examples might help us to craft different language for you, perhaps, that might actually capture what you're trying.
Well, what I've suggested
Tracy
here.
Tracy would like to.
Again, what
I
I've
have an
suggested
example.
here, just a sec, is that what we do is agree to come back to it in a meaningful way that doesn't necessarily hold up. Because there are nuances and there are
There
question
are,
marks. This is a
definitely.
significant change.
It's
What the
complicated.
district can do is agree to come back to impact bargaining over it and separately look at these individual scenarios. So in reaching an agreement that is somewhat predictable and also provides accountability and reassurance to the teachers who are staying.
And that's fine. I think that's acceptable, but I still would like to have some examples so that we can consider this and we're on the same page. I think there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of ambiguity, and enforcing something like this when
Very hard.
this group, none of us read it the same.
Okay, I have an
Um,
example, actually.
I'd like a few examples because there's a number of
There's a
variables.
number
that
at
can
different
happen.
levels and
And
different.
Okay,
different
well, let me
classes.
give you the one that I have, right?
Okay.
At my school, there is an opening in 2nd grade. And today, in a staff meeting, we heard that unit, they couldn't get someone, there was applicants, but no one that they chose to hire. So they are collapsing that unit and putting those students amongst the other 2nd grade teachers. So until a time would be decided that they would find somebody, those students are going to be put into the other 2nd grade classrooms, right? So that's a whole unit worth of students that's being spread amongst all of the other 2nd grade teachers. Right?
Okay, so and my head is spinning with questions, right?
Yeah, me
Because
too.
we have some schools that have 2 second grades. I have some schools that have 8 second grades, right? And so when you give us that example. I don't know how many were in the other classrooms. Is it still gonna keep us within our averages there?
Well, So
So
so the thing that we have to look
that's-
at is
yeah.
by doing that, we call that leveling, by doing that. Would it put us out of compliance with class size? If that was the case, we'd have to put a co-teach in a situation. So that's another variable. So if a teacher receives two other students and they go above class size for that, then we have to add a co-teach to that. So what
So does that
happens with that? So that, my point.
So does that
So are
teacher
you saying
still-
Class size per that class, or are you saying?
On the grade group average, on the
Average.
grade group average, but it depends on how many students are being displaced, right? If there's, 15 students being displaced to 3 different class sizes, chances are it's going to throw one or more of those classes above class size, or one or more of that grade group above class size. So to my point, to Lori's point, if you can give us several examples like that, so we can kind of work through them, because as I mentioned before, to administer this might be very, very difficult to do. And so I'd like to have as many examples as possible so we can consider every scenario and see what the impact might be. I mean, the intent of the district and the success of the district for the last 15 or more years has been meet class size, and we have and we will.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not suggesting that you haven't, and like you said, the one year that you didn't, there were financial penalties, but that, I mean, every particularly large district should run that risk. This provides internal agreed upon accountability that the statute has removed, and that's all that's doing. It's not suggesting that the district's intent is to do anything different, but it is providing accountability to ensure that that does not happen. Number 6, recognizes your previous, or the item on your counter proposal that was in response to our proposal regarding free childcare for the children or dependents of our instructional staff. The board noted, or the district noted, that the board also already provides free pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 education for employees' children beyond what is funded by the voluntary pre-K program. And so those wraparound services are provided free of cost to employees. And we mentioned, or you noted, I think, in the last counter proposal, that was somewhere between 65 and 95 a week, and you corrected my math that amounted to quite significant expenditure for the district on a daily or a yearly basis of $500,000. So we recognize that and note that you, even though I don't think that it's been something that, I don't know how long it's been going on, but the district did specify that it would sunset on June 30th. I don't know if I'm not sure why the district would not intend to continue that. But I did note the sunset clause here. But I asked, again, similar to item 5, that we agree to collaborate in researching, evaluating, and negotiating an agreement to provide access to and charge no fees for not just the children, but the grandchildren, dependents, or legal wards of instructional bargaining unit employees, but also for before care and after care and extended voluntary pre-K. So voluntary pre-K is already included here, but for parents, not necessarily for grandparents, et cetera. So this would expand that scope. And again, what we're asking is that there is there's a bargaining process that comes together to affect this change by the end of this year. So even if we are not, and your response, you're different from the previous item, you did respond to this as to what the value of it could be. This allows us to continue to talk about it, even if the district is not at this point in a place where you can say, this is how much this would be worth, and this is the extent to which we can do it. Some of the variables here, just like you mentioned in previous sessions, the fact that before care and after care are contracted with outside agencies, that there are contract stipulations that would have to be negotiated prospectively. So how would we handle that? There are a lot of variables. What we're saying is that we should open the door to negotiating this benefit for employees and make those changes as necessary to make it a reality. Similarly, in number 7, the board, we recognize that the board's counter proposal has been to, as of last week, was to pay for all instructional employees to renew their teaching. This is your language. I just transferred it over. To renew their teaching certificate with the Florida DOE, to sunset on June 30th. This is new language or new practice, and so I can understand why there would be a sunset built in here. But we've asked that, again, just like above, that we continue to meet to negotiate an agreement for ongoing coverage of not just the initial certification, but ongoing licensing, renewal, credentialing, professional development, and other fees regarding or required for licensure. We asked that, and I think it's important to clarify here, some of our teachers for this year have had already paid their certification fees prior to this agreement. So we would ask that we come to the understanding that if we're going to pay for that certification for the next 2 years, that anybody who has already done it for this year would be incorporated into would be incorporated into the agreement.
Right.
I was actually at a school visit this morning, and this is one of the things that came up from several people there. They're
Okay.
really asking about that, and I said, you know what, that looks like it's a good thing, and it looks like it's going into what we're going to be agreeing to, hopefully.
And acknowledging that the district's counter on this, even with the sunset provision, was really beyond what we were originally asked. Well, it was different from what we were originally asking for. It was covering the initial certification, which that wasn't included in what we originally asked for. So we appreciate the fact that you found some
Renewal.
creativity on that.
It was the renewal.
It was renewed.
It was renewal of certification.
But what we specified
No, I'm
was
just
that
clarifying
it
what
was
we
for
presented.
it was for, and I think the original language did say something like outside of the base certification requirement, that this was for teachers who needed this certification that was something very specific to their role and not just for their general employment as a teacher. So what you propose, even though it was different from what we proposed, it's a good, I mean, it's a good offer. We just ask that because the district has had a difficult time evaluating this and saying this is what the cost would be. The responses that we've gotten have been, we don't really know how to count this, and so we're declining it. What we've said is, rather than just stop and say we don't know, so we're not going to look. Let's look. Let's work together and look to find these ongoing ways to keep our professionals able, our teachers able to serve in our schools and able to live in our communities.
Well, and I agree with that. And I would agree with that. I don't know if it is simply a no. We are proposing, our proposals are items that we feel were a great suggestion and a great, and it impacts the majority and everybody in the instructional group that you represent. But the reasons why we had the sunsetting as well is because it does exactly what you said, is look at it. How is it going? Is it feasible? Is it cost inhibitive? I mean, is it now the cost impacting ability in future years to provide increases in salary? I mean, when we have that, and then we have everything that when you haven't had to pay it before, you first have to see, okay, what is that impact going to be? Again, I'm going to go back to your request regarding the before and after care. Right? I have no idea how many people would take advantage of that. I don't think, unless I do a major survey, unless I do a survey. And, you know, surveys, it's good if you get 20%, but you can kind of gauge, you know, be based on that, you know, what you would do. And I can estimate, but then what happens? I always have to, and we always have to, what if 100% of our people are interested in partaking in whatever it might be? We have to know that from a financial impact. It's different if 10% take part in something versus 100%. But if I'm budgeting, have to make sure I have the ability to do the 100%, right? Because I can't simply say, I can't follow what we agreed to. So a couple of things on that point. So I know we were asking questions along the way, so bear with me for a moment. Did anybody have any questions? We're going to obviously need a caucus for a moment. But does anybody have any questions to clarify before?
Can we just go back, because I don't think I caught that on number 3. On the supplement for the tech coordinator supplement.
Yeah.
So people that are currently the tech coordinator at a school, will they continue to get the supplement?
Yeah, I specify here that this would be an extension of that supplement to all LMTs not currently receiving it.
So it's so that's a cost.
It's bridging the gap between those that.
But it's an
receive it now.
additional cost. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah,
cost,
yeah.
right? So,
Which is one of the reasons that we propose increasing the total amount to supplements by instead of 3.5 to 4.25%.
an additional cost.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do see a little bit of an issue with that though, because it's, so then at a site, let's just say Largo Middle School, it's close, Largo
Yeah.
Middle, has their technology teacher, maybe is their tech coordinator instead of their LMT. But we're saying that the LMT should also get the tech coordinator supplements. So now that school has 2 supplements provided. I have Seminole Middle then saying, well, wait a minute, I have 2 people. And so and to be, again, this is something we look at to be fair and consistent across the board, right? So
Yeah.
that is, again, I'm gonna go back to that. That could open up
Yeah.
other requests, right? Okay, now we need to have two. Well, then that's another cost, right? So again, as we're trying to give the most for salaries, this all interferes with that. So
Yeah, I think
Or
that some of
impairs
the
it.
mitigating factors there might be the fact that again, well, this particular point isn't mitigating, but I think it's important to note is that the library media specialist job was expanded to include technology, and not only because that was a district action, but you also have the impact of statute and all of the changes that have been made to our compliance
I am
responsibilities.
not arguing any changes and so forth. We're asking, and what you're asking for is a supplement to be identified for a specific
Right.
person. And all I'm saying, I can agree or not agree with who they assign it to, but it is a school-based decision, and there's a response. I've gotten emails from people who say, I'm not the LMT, but I'm the tech coordinator. So are you going to take it? Am I going to, lose $2,000? And
Yeah,
I don't
this would
know,
be the
like-
extent, this would be the extension to make sure, and if someone already has it, this would effectively compensate.
But again, it was that person who didn't want to do it, right? So again, you've got schools who an LMT says, I don't want to be identified as a
But they're
tech
doing
coordinator.
the job.
But again, I'm not the two people, right? I'm not the person there saying, no, that's why I say we have to be careful, because there are situations out there, and when you
Yeah,
do that.
there are situations, and that's understandable, but I think that what we do is shoot for, like, just like you said, the philosophy of trying to take care of as many people as possible, and then we can address outlying situations as they come up. I would
But
certainly
it's
suggest
in
that they're gonna
contract,
be
so
in
I
the
won't,
extreme
I can't
minority.
break that contract, so.
I think
that's
this
why.
language actually provides for consideration of those individual circumstances.
So I have one more question. I know your number 7 is that we're gonna discuss possibly how to implement these wraparound services for children of employees. So,
Oh, yeah.
That would be 6.
6.
I'm sorry,
Number 6.
6. Okay, number 6. So just some questions on capacity. We have our club,
Mhm.
I believe there's
Dunedin. I think
that
is the other.
provides. There's capacity issues. Would your suggestion mean that we are bumping, for lack of a better word, community members, children, use of those facilities in favor of
Employees.
the children of our employees?
No, it would be to work towards providing access to and charge no fees. And so the providing access to could be the expansion of those programs or the
But they're not our
implementation.
They're not our
programs.
program.
Not our program.
Correct, but you contract with those programs and therefore you have some control over their contractual terms.
They're on
Now
wait
that
lists now.
existing
They're on
contracts are in
waitlists.
place, I understand that.
Yeah,
But those contracts are renewed or not, but they're certainly examined for renewal on a regular basis. And so working together on this proposal or this ongoing sort of project would allow us to design a way to affect this that could be part of those contract negotiations. Because like, it's just kind of like we said in the first proposal was charge no fees. But, and we talked about at our discussion, I think it was last week or the week before, that the district doesn't really charge fees. But they contract with these agencies or organizations to charge fees. And so it's sort of a transfer of that role, but the effect is the same. And we would have to look at the way in which the effect is that our employees have access to no cost childcare before school, after school, or this wraparound voluntary VBK, which you clarified is already provided for employees. That particular part of it is now provided for employees' children. What we've asked is that scope be expanded to include grandchildren, dependents, or legal wards.
So to Lori's point, I mean, there are contracts we have with outside agencies. They're currently, the YMCA, I know at least several locations is on a wait list. They can't get staffing to. I'm just concerned that would create, I don't know how you could agree to a contract to ask them to expand that program. The other thing, there's limited space at some of these facilities. So I mean, it's something we'd have to talk to the providers.
And
about it.
those
They
would
would
be
have to
talking
invoice
points.
us,
Yeah.
funded through the Juvenile Welfare Board, at least the Y and R Club, and so they have contracts with, so that's an extremely complicated.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah, I mean,
proposal
I
that you
agree.
make.
It's not simple. And Dina and I, we've talked about it at the table previously, how it was somewhat different it could be different in another county where they have internal programs and some of them are run by contractual agencies or contracted agencies, but not everyone does, or, not every site. Not all these programs aren't necessarily available at every single site. So we understand that there would be parameters around this that would define what that access was. But again, our philosophy is on this, instead of saying, we don't know exactly what it would look like, and therefore we can't do any of it. Let's talk about what we can do, even if it's agreeing now to have those conversations going forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, if we can caucus for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure.
I know we've got about probably 15 minutes.
We're here, we're certainly willing to
Snacks over here.
I should get closer to the camera. Oh, there, that's better.
I think we're back live. Sir, we are live. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. So just a couple of comments on responses. So just overall on numbers 3, 5, 6, and 7, stating in each one of those that they were researching, evaluating, and negotiating and agreeing on each one of those items. This assumes that there will be agreement and enter into a contract, so we can't determine to negotiate.
Until we research and evaluate the issue. So again, the language there might need to just be worked on a little bit. But I want to go back to, I think what we spent the most of the time on today was just the salary and the numbers. So, you know, regardless of the calculation I know we spent a lot of time over the last week doing that, so we appreciate the conversation back and forth. Your proposal is $3 million more than we've offered. In addition, you're proposing the district pick up the entire increase in healthcare, which is another 900,000. And also I know there was a comment made earlier that, and just wanted to clarify that there are no longer ESSER funds that are available for this, to be used for this. If you wanted to say that.
May I clarify that, or do you want me to wait till a little bit later?
Whichever you would prefer.
Just what Lee was referring to, and I know we moved pretty quickly through it, but there are approximately, from our understanding, between $3 and $4 billion of ESSER funds that have yet been unclaimed from the state. So it's not suggesting that the district has not very carefully designed ESSER plans and tried to maximize that impact. But what we're suggesting is that there are still funds that are available for the purposes that we have assigned those ESSER funds in previous years.
Have
We also
done
have
anything on
the,
that?
We have
Pardon?
drawn down nearly all of our allocation, which was upwards of $300 million. The undrawn down balance that we currently have is about $22 million.
sorry, I'm sorry.
It's about $22 million.
It's all appropriate.
And it's all appropriated. It's all
Well, and again,
set
we
to things like
understand the
summer bridge,
appropriation.
pre-K and things like that.
Yeah, another way of referring to that is budgeting, but again, it's one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that one of the reasons that the allocation to the reserve every year was far beyond what the reserve was required to be by board policy and almost double state statute was funds from ESSER that were conserved in order to help to cushion that move away from ESSER funds. And so what we're suggesting is that whether that's an additional drawdown from the state, or if it's simply the excess funds that have been directed to the reserve, that those are available to cover that. That's what Lee was referring to.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Anything else on that? Okay.
So, I mean, so the excess funds that you refer to, were put aside in a reserve for from ESSER and ARP a couple of years ago. And if you recall, that helped to offset the impact of family empowerment scholarships in 22. So, much of those funds were utilized for that. And our funding that we have available to us is approximately 22 million, as Ms. Jordan just mentioned, and it's all been earmarked and appropriated for specific purposes. And the other thing is, you know, even if we had funds of those available, which we don't for this purpose, they're non-recurring sources of funding, once again. So if we did that this year, next year, that would be a hole that we'd have to fill because there wouldn't be operating funds available to do that with. So there aren't funds available for that. And if you'd like to see the books related to that, I'd be happy to show them to you.
Okay, so I'll continue moving forward. So again, we just wanted to restate that we have an amount of money that we have set aside, which is about almost 19 million for PCTA bargaining group. That's with fringe. And I know we talk fringe or no fringe, but it is 19.5 million, which is the cost to the district. Again, to restate our dollar amount proposal, I know you presented yours. So we're proposing the following increases for employees. Those on the grandfathered schedule at 1,945. Performance schedule at effective 1,823 increase. And performance highly effective $2,431 increase. And that is in addition to the increase that has already been passed through for a referendum. So again, we are about $3 million difference, but again, I know with some of the added the request, the almost $1 million for healthcare, that's about a $4 million, that is 4 million, it's not about difference. So that is where I think we stand at this point. I don't know if anybody else has anything else
No,
to
we just
say.
need to quantify this proposal.
Okay.
So,
So we're gonna need to schedule another time to meet.
okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm procedurally following what you're saying. So you're rejecting our counter in total.
Well,
Or-
because we don't have an agreement with everything right now, right? There are some things in here. Again, I mentioned the researching, evaluating, negotiating agreement. We need to look at that. We need to look at some of the things you're asking, the increase in the athletic supplements. I'm not sure how it gets to 301,000 from our 299 at a percentage increase. So I want to go back and look at those numbers again. And so
Number
forth.
5, you're gonna get us some examples
Mhm.
of, so we can.
So we can
come
really
together on
understand that,
issue.
the
I
request.
know we're all on the same page.
Unless you all want to caucus and have us return.
Well, we wouldn't caucus unless, are you suggesting that you are going to formulate a counter and then we should set a meeting for that?
Well, we're still about 4 million apart. So,
And I know-
But there are parts of it, I think, that you're saying that you would consider. So I just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying that you are declining to increase your financial, like your straight compensation offer any more than what it is now. And it sounds as though there are some parts of the additional items that you would be willing to consider, but with, in a counter proposal that addresses some places that where you differ on language. Is that correct?
That second part, I think, is correct. I mean, we can conceptually look at some of those issues and maybe come back with different language. We did not like the implication in paragraphs 6 and 7 that we're bound to execute an agreement. So that would be a language issue.
and 3 and 5.
Yeah, the parties agree to collaborate in researching, evaluating, and negotiating an agreement. So that language is unacceptable. We're in agreement that we can kind of look at the concept, but we're not in agreement that we are ultimately going to enter into an agreement. On the other issue, and I think we need to address this, you said early on that philosophically you disagree that there's a finite pot of money. We're $4 million apart. And the offer that has been made cost the district $19 million, $19.4 million. That is quite a bit more than Mr. Smith is comfortable with. It's a good offer. You are now wanting to increase that by $4 million. So we're not prepared to accept that. And we need to go back and discuss what, if any, other alternative provisions we could agree to.
So again, and I wanna, I've done this a couple of times and you can receive it how you want to receive it. I would ask that we refrain from talking about it in a comfort level way, because I think that's really disrespectful to, and certainly no disrespect intended to Mr. Smith. I respect your professionalism and your experience. But we have talked about at the table why we fundamentally disagree on the way to accomplish this, the way that we must accomplish this, because the reality is that our people are living with this month, a 5.9 year-over-year inflation rate. So when we say things like, this is as much as we are comfortable with,
So
that really, I think is, I'm asking that we not be disrespectful of the fact that suggesting that this is a comfort level issue when our people are seriously facing eviction, homelessness, food insecurity. Let's stay away from that kind of thing, because it doesn't help any of us look
So I
like we
think
relate to what people are
perhaps-
actually dealing
perhaps
with.
comfort is not the right word to use. But what I will say is what we don't want to do is put the district in a financial situation in which they are in a position where they have to make cuts because we overspent. Many districts in the state have been in that situation. There's one right across the bay that's been in that situation for quite a number of years. There's one just over the Skyway Bridge that suffered that position for a long time. So what I have to do as CFO is I have to look to see how much money is available within available funds that we get from the state. And I've explained that all to you before, what came from the state, to the point at which we're going to remain fiscally solid, fiscally responsible. If I go beyond that, then we're at this table next year talking about, how to accommodate the deficit that we now have. How do I accommodate the overspending that we've incurred? So the amount of money we're offering you exceeds where I believe we should be based upon those criteria. And for you to be asking for $4 million more puts it even further away. So I don't want us to be in a situation as a district, and even for your bargaining group, that we have to look at where we have to cut, because 83% of our total expenses are in salaries and benefits. So if we have to cut significant numbers, as many districts have had to do in this state and across the country, we're looking at people, and that's not where we want to be.
And I hear you. I would say that in a world or in a district where we have currently almost 100 vacancies, where it is yet unclear, because we've said that we have not been able to come to an agreement on how to even evaluate. To me, it seems like we could evaluate it. I understand that the district disagrees with me on that. But we have almost 100 vacancies. We have collapsed units. We have the averages that I used in my calculations don't account and I pointed that out, don't account for many employees that are on leave right now that are costing the district, I mean, depending on their health insurance situation, I guess, to comply with federal law, $0. And so I would posit that we can plan for these things, and that the deficit, if there were to be a deficit, and I know that we've talked about the fact that we haven't had layoffs, because it just is a reality. We live in a perpetual shortage of educators. It is more extreme this year than it has been in any previous year, and that's been compounded by actions at the state level, both on the financial side and on the professional side. So to say that, one, there would be a deficit, and two, that we would be unable to find some sort of solution to that deficit minus laying people off, it just doesn't ring true with the conditions that we have lived under for a number of years, are exacerbated now, and are the reality that our people are living with. You have the reserve for a reason. It's there for a reason. I just think we disagree on the concept of what emergency would occur that would legitimize or would legitimately call for drawing upon those reserves. And we have continually suggested it's here, it's happening, it's now.
But and I will go back and say, it is recurring. And understand anything we go into in the reserves, then we will be back at the table next year without, how do we then compensate? We have already allocated, and put aside that. So again, we're going to, I don't know how else to say.
So,
that.
yeah, and that's fine, and we need to quantify what you've offered us, but I want to be clear that you keep mentioning collapsing units, and
Yeah.
we're collapsing units for no other reason than we have declining enrollment. We've lost upwards of 2,000 students year over year from last year to this year. We had, I'm sorry, 2,300 students have disappeared from this district between last year and this year. Students equate to dollars. Do simple math, take 2,300 multiplied by $8,500 per student, that's roughly what we get. And that's the dollar amount that we reduce in funding. We had our family empowerment scholarships increase from roughly $54 million to $107 million. That's funding we're not getting. So, when you say we have the money, the reserves are there, and, reserves are there for a reason. We have a board policy that says we have to have a 5% reserve. That's about where we are, 5%, just at 5%. So, it would require a board policy to be changed in order for us to go below that.
Correct, and that's something that we have
And so,
proposed at the board, to the
So to
board.
Paula's point, you've asked us for some things here. I'd like to quantify what you've given us. And, we'll be in touch.
We'll come back with another,
Yeah.
Yep, another date too. Okay.
So,
All right.
okay, so we would expect to meet again, and you would bring, I just want to make sure that that we understand what to expect. We'd be scheduling another meeting
Mhm.
for a potential counter proposal.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We want to go ahead and look at,
Sure. Sorry. What do we want to?
We do understand the October 1st deadline is coming up. We're even available later this week if you,
Why don't we, let us go get into the office tomorrow and see what this looks like, and then I can call you in the mid-morning.
sure.
And we can then figure out what time and what the time frame looks like. Would that work?
yes, we,
Okay.
just to clarify, I mean, I know that I'm kind of the, like y'all are in PESPA bargaining tomorrow.
But Friday,
At 4, but we have flexibility to be potentially after that Friday. So I mean, we've got flexibility. If we're committed to come to the table and really put in the time to do it, we will, do everything we can to, I know the team is committed to that.
Okay.
Make ourselves
Sounds
available.
Great.
Thank you.